I'm buying up every property on this block," Derek announced loudly to the three investors standing beside him on the corner of Fifth and Morrison in downtown Portland. "This neighborhood is about to explode. I'm going to own this entire street." I stood in the doorway of the historic office building I'd been working from, watching him gesture around with the confidence of someone who believed he'd stumbled onto the greatest real estate opportunity of his career. Derek had always been like this, loud, brash, convinced that his most recent idea was revolutionary. The only difference now was that he was doing it without me, which meant he was doing it without the intelligence that had actually made our partnership work for 5 years. What Derek didn't know was that I already owned everything he was trying to buy, and I was about to teach him one of the most expensive lessons of his life. My name is Victoria Summers, and I'm a real estate acquisition specialist. I have a quiet reputation in Portland's commercial real estate circles. The kind of reputation where people call me when they want something done properly, without noise or spectacle. Derek, on the other hand, had built a loud reputation. He was the guy who talked about deals before he closed them. He was the guy who bragged about his successes. He was the guy who fundamentally didn't understand that in commercial real estate, discretion is currency. We'd been business partners for 5 years. We'd met at a real estate development conference in Seattle and discovered we had complementary skills. He was excellent at identifying emerging neighborhoods. I was excellent at executing the acquisitions that turned neighborhoods into investments. Together, we'd successfully acquired and renovated 7 properties in Portland's Pearl District. We'd made significant money. We'd built a reputation as serious players in the market. And then Derek decided we should dissolve the partnership. "I want to do my own thing," Derek said at our final business lunch, 6 months before he showed up on Fifth and Morrison with his new investors. "I think I've learned enough from you that I don't need the partnership anymore." He didn't say it, but I knew what he meant. He thought I'd taught him everything valuable I knew, and now he could operate independently and keep all the profits for himself. He thought my value had been in the knowledge transfer, not in the ongoing execution. I was relieved when he left. Derek was exhausting. He wanted credit for every decision, he wanted to be seen as the visionary, and he wanted to move fast in a business where moving carefully was what separated successful investors from the people who lost their shirts. When our partnership dissolved, we divvied up the properties fairly. He took 3. I took 4. We each got commission on the sales we'd facilitated. And then Derek went off to build his own empire, and I went back to what I'd been doing before him, quietly acquiring properties that nobody else saw value in yet. The properties on Fifth and Morrison were perfect for that strategy. The block he was now trying to flip had been my target for 2 years before Derek and I even met. I'd been watching it, studying it, understanding the market dynamics. It was in transition. The warehouse district was becoming desirable. Tech companies were moving in. Young professionals were looking for loft-style apartments. The area was about to explode, but it was moving slowly. The timing wasn't quite right yet. Most property owners on that block were small investors who'd owned their buildings for decades. They weren't motivated to sell. They were comfortable with their tenants and their modest rental income. So I waited. After Derek left the partnership, I accelerated my timeline. I started acquiring buildings on Fifth and Morrison through a series of shell corporations. The first building sold to me in 2021. The owner was ready to retire. I paid a fair price. I was quiet about it. The property was transferred to an LLC that bore no obvious connection to my name. Over the next 18 months, I acquired 6 more buildings on the block. Each acquisition was strategic. I waited for property owners to be ready to move. I made offers that were fair but firm. I completed the transactions quietly. By the time Derek showed up to flip the neighborhood, I owned 8 of the 10 buildings on the block. The 2 I didn't own belonged to a commercial bank that had foreclosed on them, and a nonprofit organization that used one of the buildings for community services. What Derek was attempting to do was classic gentrification: buy up properties, increase the value through development or repositioning, and then sell to developers or corporations for massive profit. It's a strategy that works in emerging neighborhoods. It's also a strategy that requires control of the market. You need to own enough properties that you can dictate terms. You need to be able to assemble land in packages that developers actually want. Derek had none of that. He had a theory and some investors who believed in his vision. He didn't have me. I watched from my office window as Derek walked the block with his investors, pointing out buildings, explaining his vision, showing them financial projections that were, I'm certain, optimistic and potentially fraudulent. I watched him speak with the bank about acquiring their foreclosed properties. I watched him attempt to contact the nonprofit about purchasing their building. And then, when he was at maximum confidence, when he truly believed he was about to execute the largest deal of his career, I made my move. I invited Derek to coffee. I knew he couldn't resist the opportunity to brag about his new project. We met at a cafe on Southwest Stark Street, neutral territory where neither of us had a particular advantage. Victoria, he said, his face lighting up with the kind of excitement that comes from thinking you're about to share a brilliant idea with someone who will finally understand how brilliant you are. I'm glad you wanted to meet. I wanted to tell you about something I'm working on. I know what you're working on, I said calmly. You're trying to acquire properties on Fifth and Morrison. You're planning to flip the neighborhood. You're presenting it to investors as an emerging market opportunity. Derek's excitement dimmed slightly. How did you know about that? Because I've been watching, I said. Derek, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully because this is important for your business plan. I pulled out a folder. In it were the deeds to 8 properties. Each deed was clearly documented with the transfer date and the current owner information. 8 properties, all on Fifth and Morrison, all owned by me through various shell corporations. Derek's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, then disbelief, then understanding, then something approaching panic. You own, he started. 80% of the buildings on your block, I finished. 8 out of 10. The only 2 I don't own are the foreclosed properties at the bank and the nonprofit building. Everything else is mine. But why? Derek asked. When did you even? Right after we dissolved the partnership, I said. I saw the same opportunity you're seeing now. The difference is I actually executed instead of just talking about it. I've owned these properties for 18 months. I've been quietly collecting them through legal acquisitions. And now you're trying to flip a neighborhood that I already control. Derek sat back in his chair. I could see him doing the math in his head, understanding what this meant for his deal. Your investors are going to realize they can't get the properties they need, I said. The bank will sell you their 2 buildings if the price is right, but that won't be enough. You need a critical mass of properties to make the neighborhood flip work. You need control of the market. You don't have that. I do. So what are you telling me? Derek asked, his voice quieter now. I'm telling you that you have 3 options, I said. Option 1. You tell your investors that the deal isn't viable because the market is already controlled by another investor who won't sell. Option 2. You approach me about partnering to develop the neighborhood together. Option 3. You try to strong-arm your way through somehow and watch your investors lose money while I increase my holdings and profit from the neighborhood development, whether you're involved or not. Derek stared at me. You did this on purpose, he said finally. You deliberately acquired these properties knowing I would try to do this. I acquired these properties because they were good investments, I corrected. I acquired them because the neighborhood is transitioning and the value will increase substantially. I acquired them because real estate is about patience and strategy, not about showing up with a group of investors and announcing your plans to everyone within earshot. The fact that your plan conflicts with my existing position is your problem, not mine. Derek left that coffee shop understanding exactly how outmaneuvered he was. Over the next week, I watched what happened. Derek approached the bank about the 2 foreclosed properties. He was told the sale price had increased significantly. Apparently someone with deep pockets had started bidding on them. That someone was Patricia Torres, a real estate developer I'd worked with before, who agreed to acquire the bank's properties as part of a larger development strategy. Derek contacted the nonprofit about their building. They politely declined, telling him they'd recently been approached by an organization that wanted to provide them with grant funding to improve their operations and upgrade their building. That organization was a nonprofit foundation I'd established specifically for situations like this. Derek was being completely shut out. He tried to move forward with his investors anyway, but the financial projections didn't work without significant property control. The investors wanted to know why he couldn't secure the buildings he'd promised them. Derek's explanations became increasingly vague. Eventually, the investors withdrew. Derek's deal collapsed entirely. 3 months later, I announced my own development plan for the Fifth and Morrison block, a mixed-use development that included affordable housing, retail spaces, and office buildings. I brought in Patricia Torres as my development partner. We began the renovation process. We created jobs. We transformed the neighborhood in a way that generated substantial profits while also providing community benefit. Derek watched from the sidelines as the neighborhood exploded in value, exactly as he'd predicted it would. But instead of him profiting from that explosion, it was me. Instead of him controlling the development, I was controlling it. I ran into Derek at a real estate conference about a year after the coffee meeting. He looked tired. He'd attempted to start his own real estate venture several more times after the Fifth and Morrison disaster, but none of them had worked out. He was back to working for a larger development company, operating as an employee rather than an owner. "That was cruel," he said when he saw me. "What you did to me. You had all the properties already, and you let me think I had a real opportunity." "I had the properties because I worked for them," I said. "I spent 2 years acquiring those buildings before you even knew they existed. I didn't let you think anything. You showed up with your investors, announced your plans loudly, and discovered that someone else had already executed the strategy more completely than you could have imagined. That's not cruelty. That's just business." "It felt like you were setting me up," Derek said. "I wasn't setting you up," I replied. "I didn't know you were coming to Fifth and Morrison. I didn't know about your investors or your plans until you showed up bragging about it. But I was prepared. And that's the difference between us. You think real estate is about talking about opportunities. I know it's about quietly executing while other people are still planning." Derek nodded slowly and walked away. What happened after that was interesting. The Fifth and Morrison development became one of the most successful mixed-use projects in Portland that decade. It generated over $400 million in total value across the entire block. My share of that, my 8 properties and their subsequent appreciation, made me a significantly wealthier person. More importantly, it established me as a major player in Portland's development scene. Derek faded from the real estate world. I heard he eventually moved out of Portland and started working in property management in a different city. His reputation never recovered from the Fifth and Morrison failure. The lesson here is straightforward. In commercial real estate, control comes from preparation and patience, not from visibility and volume. Derek believed that announcing his plans made him powerful. He believed that showing up with investors gave him legitimacy. He believed that his vision was enough to make him successful. He was wrong on all counts. I succeeded because I spent 2 years watching that neighborhood. I succeeded because I made quiet acquisitions while Derek was doing other things. I succeeded because I understood that market control requires ownership, not just ideas. And I succeeded because when the moment came to execute, I was already in position to dictate the terms. Derek's mistake wasn't in choosing to leave our partnership. His mistake was in believing that he understood the game well enough to play it independently. His mistake was in not recognizing that the knowledge transfer between us wasn't about tips and tricks. It was about a fundamental understanding of how markets work and how to move through them with intelligence and restraint. And that's not something you can learn from someone else. That's something you have to develop through your own experience or not at all. Years later, when young real estate professionals ask me how to succeed in commercial development, I tell them this story. I tell them about Derek and his big plans and his loud announcement and his complete failure to understand that the person he should have been most careful of was the one partner he'd left behind. Then I tell them, move quietly. Execute methodically. Build your position before anyone knows you're building it. And when the moment comes to make your move, make sure you've already won before anyone even realizes the game has started. That's the real estate strategy that works. That's how you flip neighborhoods and control markets and build wealth that lasts. And that's why Derek is working in property management somewhere in the Midwest, and I'm running one of Portland's most successful real estate development companies.